All I could hear were the snickers and the scrape of old wooden chairs as the congregation arranged itself along the walls of St. Mary's Hall. The ceiling fans whirred overhead, starved for maintenance in the sticky Mumbai heat. Their blades moved the thick air just enough to make my damp shirt clamp tighter to my back. The paneled windows on each side glared with a syrupy yellow light, and the crucifix at the end of the hall watched over me like a silent judge. My mother stood at the front, hands folded like a statue, her lips pressed flat. I could see the damp spot on her brow. Around her, the parish elders arrayed themselves, the ones who always seemed to hold verdicts in their gaze. Uncle Francis looked at me like he'd already given up. Aunt Leela's wedding bangles glinted as she shook her head, mouthing silently to her neighbor. Even my younger cousin Marlene squirmed with embarrassment where she sat, refusing to meet my eye. Father D'Souza held up his hand and gestured for silence, though it was already heavy, weighted by suspicion more than concern. The old wooden clock ticked above his head, marking a time I knew I'd want to forget. "We are not here to shame, but to counsel," he began, voice trembling with an uncertain gravity. "We must ask our young Anthony to think carefully about his future, for the sake of his family and our own peace of mind." He turned to me. "Anthony, you say you want to become a sound designer." He let the words stretch in the air, as if expecting someone to laugh. They did not disappoint. A chorus of low chuckles rolled through the hall, a cough disguising a scoff. Aunt Lila spoke up. "You could be an engineer like your cousin in the Gulf, or get a call center job. Why not think practically?" Her voice was sickly sweet, but her eyes were hard. My father, rigid and silent, sat in the front row. His gaze drilled through the ground as if searching for something to hold on to. He had not spoken to me since I made my decision. I swallowed, throat burning. It would have been so easy to shrink, so easy to say I'd change, apologize for troubling them. My mother finally looked at me, her eyes glassy, somewhere between pleading and defeat. But I couldn't step back, not after tasting what I'd tasted, those heady nights spent alone with my battered headphones. Crafting landscapes out of nothing, making an empty room blossom with imagined thunder, laughter, lives. It meant more than anything they could offer. "I know it sounds strange," I said, voice quivering, "but this is what I want. I hear the city differently than you do. I want to create worlds with sound, for films, music, everything. It matters to me." Another laugh, sharp and ugly. Someone muttered, "Beta, too much cinema, not enough reality." Father D'Souza's mouth pinched. "Art is good, Anthony, but we must also live." My fingernails dug lines into my palm. "Art is what makes us live." If I expected anyone to understand, I was only fooling myself. The meeting dissolved into a low tide of advice and warnings. When I finally pushed past the thick wooden doors, the world outside blared, rickshaws skittering on Bakhtuar Road, hawkers shouting, a temple bell trembling on the air. I drank it in, shoulders tight, but something inside me was burning. Strange and defiant, my parents refused to speak as I returned home. I locked myself in my room, breathing in the stale, sun-baked air, the traffic horns like a distant applause. My father's voice rumbled through the kitchen. If he wants to starve, let him. The next few years turned hunger into a routine. Mumbai is a city that will love you only if you batter your own dignity against its doors without shame. I joined a technical institute, a modest one, since the big universities require marks I didn't have or money we didn't possess. Most classes were packed with bored students in their late teens, jostling for government jobs. I was older, staring down the barrel of my own stubbornness. But I dug in. There were nights when I wondered if I'd made a mistake, when the mixer boards turned frightful with features I didn't understand. When I realized being able to hear wasn't the same as being able to make magic. But there was music in failure too. I started shadowing anyone who would let me. A distant friend working for a television serial, an aging composer making radio jingles, even sound techs at church weddings. I carried their bags, fetched their tea, scrubbed wires with a toothbrush, and learned to set up mics in sticky, echoey rooms. Most of all, I listened to the vibration of air in a rickety CSNT train compartment, the way monsoon rain battered a tiled roof. I carried an old recorder everywhere, hunting for fragments. Sometimes I'd see Aunt Lila at Matunga Market. She would nod quickly, shifting to talk to someone else. My mother, when she called, never asked about sound. "Eat properly," she'd say. "This work is taking you nowhere." I worked freelance gigs, weddings, religious processions, corporate events, anything with speakers and cables. Money barely trickled in. I grew lean, learned to make a plate of vada pav last an afternoon. At night, my rented room rattled with noise from the corrugated tin roof, the drone of mosquitoes and nearby traffic. Still, in the quietest hours, I'd press headphones to my ears and try to turn all those collected noises into something beautiful. There were moments, rare ones, when I came close. Nights when, in the company of late edits and cups of tap chai, it seemed possible that the city was singing with me alone. But peace was always short-lived. It wasn't until I met Nikhil that things changed. He was a junior director, barely older than me, working on an independent film with the kind of ambition that makes you laugh before you believe. He found me through a friend's recommendation and called me one evening from a noisy Lokhandwala coffee shop. "I need someone who doesn't just put sounds in, but listens to the city. You free tomorrow?" he said, not waiting for a yes. His budget was tragic. The film was a drama set in Mumbai's forgotten alley. I recorded the roll of marbles, temple chants at dawn, the rattle of single coins at Dadar station, whispers through broken window panes. I sculpted entire sequences from these treasures, footsteps that meant more than dialogue, ambient hum that swelled with a character's dread or longing. We launched at a film festival in Goregaon, a crowd full of skeptics and hopefuls. I sat at the back, fidgeting through every frame. The applause that night was thunderous. People came over to talk about the sound. "I felt the city was alive," one juror said. "It was the first time I realized I could move people with what they could not see." Awards never interested me much, but the director gave me the trophy to take home. Nikhil grinned. "You made air into art." Offer letters followed. My name found its way onto better productions, and slowly I learned I could pay rent without sweating over every meal. I joined a post-production house in Andheri, where the days blurred into projects, feature films, streaming dramas, high-budget ads. I still ate vada pav for lunch out of habit. It tasted less despot, more like memory. Years passed in a haze of deadlines and digitized whispers. My family called more often. The conversations were polite, careful. My mother checked on my health, sent pictures of her church group. Dad listened in the background, sometimes offering a grunt. Nobody asked about my work. Success was less remarkable to them than my survival, but the city never let me leave who I had been. Every time I visited someone I knew, their words hovered. "Settled now? Doing real work?" Sometimes I wished I could show them what I built. Not words, not proof of income, but the worlds I had conjured. The chance came one rainy August when St. Mary's announced a charity event. Voices of Mumbai, a celebration of local talent. A friend from my first big project, Jonathan, called to ask if I'd help set up the audio. Their own equipment was ancient. The sound was always a complaint. "Just make sure nobody leaves early," he joked. I agreed, less for charity, more for a chance to stand in the same place I was once laughed at. The church hall looked the same as when I'd left. Faded blue chairs, crucifix unsmiling, fans still limping through the thick air. Old faces trickled in. Aunt Leela, older and softer. Father D'Souza, eyebrows silvered but still stern. Children who had grown into teenagers, their faces thinner, voices deeper. I arrived early, unloading cases with my team. 3 sharply dressed young engineers who respected me enough not to call me sir. We set up portable speakers, wireless mics, and a subtle surround array I'd designed myself. Most of all, I brought a secret weapon, a short sound piece I had crafted for a recent film, featuring Mumbai herself, breathing and alive, put together from years of field recordings, spliced into a narrative both wild and gentle. Father D'Souza met me at the door. He glanced at the equipment, at me, at the quietly humming staff I brought along. "Ah, come back to help us, Anthony." He meant it kindly, but I felt the old caution there. I smiled. "I promised to use my gifts for the community." He nodded, uncomfortable, and left us to our work. The performances were mediocre. Children singing hallelujahs, an uncle reading poetry, a flute solo from a visiting teacher. Crackles of feedback reminded everyone they'd had enough of amateur AV. I ran sound for each act. Clean, crisp, polished, but never flattering. The applause